Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for today's Christmas cards, I am starting off with some Neenah Desert Storm, not Solar White, Desert Storm 100-pound cardstock that I had cut a full sheet into quarters, so these pieces are all 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Frozen Fractals Stencils that I showed in a release and review video when these were released. Gosh, that was over a month ago now, a couple months ago. Anyway, they're very delicate stencils, like style-wise, but they're quite sturdy. However, because they have all these little open ends, they're not fully connected. I find the best way to use these is either, use your embossing paste, etc., or if you're going to ink blend over them, I'm pouncing the ink on top. I'm not rubbing it, in the swirling motion or anything like that, because of just the size of these, and it would move the stencil around. So I wanted to have this white kind of snow effect. So I'm using my Hero Art Unicorn white ink and an ink blending tool, and I'm just pouncing the ink, starting in the center where I want it to be darkest, and then allowing the ink, obviously, as it gets used up in the center and it starts lightening up towards the edges, just pouncing it up and down. I'm using a piece of painter's tape to kind of hold just one edge of the stencil down a little bit. Sometimes I'll use my fingers on the other side of the snowflake because a couple of these, like this one specifically, they're really, delicate and want to move around a bit. So I start in the center, and if you wanted to make this darker, you could add more ink and get the same effect and just have like more white in the center. But I wanted these to be kind of just soft. They're just going to be the background for my cards, but they were so fun. And I had to use all 4 of them. So I ended up making 4 cards because they're just so pretty and I couldn't decide on just one. So I just went along pouncing the ink onto these and then kind of pouncing along outside. Didn't have to be perfect. And then for my focal point, I'm using the Simon Says Magical Christmas stamp set that I got last year. I did make a card with these last year, but I didn't get to use this bear image that I absolutely love. So I decided I was going to use both images, the bear and the deer here. And I have another piece of the same Desert Storm cardstock, and I put it in my MISTI so that I could ink up these images with VersaFine ONYX black ink. And the deer one especially has some very fine script detail to it, which is just gorgeous. So I wanted to use my MISTI so I could stamp these multiple times to make sure they stamped completely perfect. And I love how the bear, it says Merry Christmas on it. I love this set. So ink those up a couple times, close the lid of my MISTI, stamp them. And I was able to rotate my paper and do this a second time so that I end up with 4 images since I'm making 4 cards. So once I have all of these stamped, I'm going to clean up my stamps, and then I'm going to take some Simon Says Schoolhouse red cardstock and this large border stamp from the same set. So I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool on the cardstock, line up the stamp, close the lid of my MISTI. I'm going to ink it up with Simon Says clear embossing ink, and I ended up stamping this more than once because I didn't press down properly enough to fully get that stamp. So I'm going to ink it up a second time and then stamp it again. And then same thing, I'm going to rotate this cardstock, use my anti-static powder tool, and then stamp it with that clear embossing ink. And once that's done, I can coat this with Simon's Gold embossing powder. So just do that over a coffee filter, get that completely coated, both images coated, and then I'm going to let my heat tool heat up for just a little bit, like 30 seconds or so, before bringing it to the paper, and then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. This is always my favorite part. It always looks for a second, it's like nothing's happening, and then bam, everything starts to melt, and it's like, oh, it's just the most satisfying thing. And I've seen a few of your guys' comments saying that, so I've started to just leave this part in my videos instead of editing it out, because it's like, well, everyone knows how embossing powder melts, but it is the just most satisfying thing to watch. So I made sure this was completely melted, and then I'm going to use the coordinating dies to die cut the bear, the deer, and that border image stamp. So I'm going to tape them into place with some washi tape before I run these through my Big Shot, and obviously I have to die cut everything twice. So just get it all lined up, tape it down, and then I'm going to run it through my Big Shot. And then all those background pieces that I had sponged with the Frozen Fractals stencils, I die cut with a stitched rectangle die. And then I put 2 of the card fronts together like off camera because I wasn't, I was kind of playing around and everything. So once I knew what I was doing, I started up the camera again and figured out how I was going to do all this. So I die cut some dark green cardstock with the Simon Says Pine Needle Trio dies. So it cuts 3 of those. So I just ran that through 4 times. So I have 3 for each card. And I'm just doing this over a scrap of paper. I'm lightly sponging that same unicorn white ink from Hero Arts just along the tips and the ends of these pine needle die cuts, because just to give it that little extra something. So just going along, lightly sponging it. Not too much effort needed there. And then I pulled out another old die set. This is the Deco Trees dies from Simon as well. I just wanted the Merry word so that I can complete my sentiment for the cards with the deer, because there's no sentiment. The bear has the Merry Christmas. So for this one, I die cut just that word Merry from some white cardstock, and I die cut it twice and adhered those together with some multimedia matte adhesive. And then I'm going to get to assembling my card fronts. So I'm just using that same multimedia matte adhesive to adhere these pine needles, just running a line down the center of them and then adhering them where I want them. So just pressing down for a few seconds so that the glue can hold, and then once it sets, it's good to go. So get that all completely adhered. And then that embossed border strip, I cut in half, so I had 4, one for each card front. I'm going to pop that onto the card front with some foam tape, so it's popped up with a bit of dimension. And then I'm going to use some more foam tape on the deer, and I'm going to place it on the top and the bottom, leaving the spot where it's going to go over that border strip so that it adheres as well with a little bit of dimension, and then press that into place. And then for the sentiment, I pulled out the Simon Says stamp. This was an older set, and now I kept Happy Christmas, the Happy Christmas stamp set. So I got just the Christmas stamp from that set, inked it up with that same VersaFine ONYX black, stamp that, and then I can adhere the Merry die cut with the same multimedia matte adhesive right over those die cuts. So then it says Merry Christmas. And I'm basically going to do the same thing with the bear one, but obviously I'm not adding any sentiments because it already is on the bear. So this one was a little bit faster. So if you wanted to forego the die cutting and stamping of sentiments and all that, you could use just the bear image if you want. I love them both. This is such a more traditional / masculine set. I love it for Christmas cards. So got those pine needles adhered, the border image adhered, and then popped on that bear. So then I've got all 4 of my card fronts. So for my bases, I'm using that same Schoolhouse red cardstock, and I cut 2 sheets in half lengthwise. So these will all be top folding A2 size cards. So once they're all cut in half, I'm scoring them all at 5.5 with my Teflon bone folder and my score buddy, doing it all at the same time. Just like I do anytime I'm, making multiples of cards, I do all the same steps at once. It just makes everything go way faster. So got all my bases scored. And then for the insides, I'm using sentiments from that same Happy Christmas stamp set. There was a couple of different sentiments in there, so I decided to use those on the insides of my cards. So I'm doing anti-static powder on the inside of all 4 cards. And then I'm going to stamp one of the sentiments on the insides of 2 of the cards, just lining everything up, getting that stamped with that same clear ink from Simon. So I'm going to stamp that, and then I'm going to use that same gold embossing powder on these sentiments as I used on that border image on the outside of the card. So I'm going to coat everything with the gold emboss powder, and I'm just going to set this aside for a second so I can stamp the other insides of the cards. So get those coated, and I'm going to use the second sentiment on the remaining 2 cards. So ink that up, stamp that. I'm going to coat it with the same gold embossing powder, and then I can heat all of this at the same time with my heat tool and melt everything all at once. So I've got all my sentiments, got my heat tool good and hot, and then I can melt these back to back, so just quick and easy. So I've got the same gold embossed sentiments as that border on the outside. And then I'm going to remove that anti-static powder that you can see on the inside of the card. I just use a Swiffer cloth. So you can use your hands and whatnot, because that'll also kind of remove it. I keep a Swiffer cloth on my desk 24/7 because I use it all the time. So remove all that anti-static powder, and then there's just a couple of little snowflake images in that same stamp set. So I just grab those and ink them up with that same Hero Arts white ink that I used on the stencils, and just stamp those around the sentiments just to give it that little extra something to finish the insides of the cards. And then to adhere everything, I'm using my ATG adhesive and applying adhesive to the back of all of these card fronts. Again, just doing everything all in one step to save me time and effort. So I get all my adhesive on the back of the card fronts, and then I can press these onto my card bases. And as always, I could have left it here. These cards are great. They can be done, but I gotta jazz them up still a little bit. and I'm rather addicted to my Copic Opaque White, so I gotta add splatter. I wanted to add splatter though regardless, because there was a few spots where I pressed too hard with the ink blending tool and the pigment ink, so there's like almost looks like smears where I didn't like, and I didn't like, especially this first card here, I didn't like how obvious it was. You can see it in kind of the upper left. So the white splatter helps to kind of cover that and hide that up. So I'm just splattering these lightly, not too much, just a nice light splatter of the white ink. That's so perfect for, you know, Christmas time, snow, that's what I'm thinking. So just a light splatter on all of these. I'd watered down that Copic Opaque White just on an acrylic block. And I'm just taking a paintbrush and flicking it against the edge of the acrylic block to create my splatter. I'm being careful about setting the cards right where the previous card was here so that I'm not getting any smears or splatter on the back of my card. But honestly, I wouldn't really care if I did, because, you know, you got splatter going on in the front. It wouldn't matter if any got in the back, to me anyway. But I try and be careful not to get any like big smears. And then clean it all up, let that dry for a few minutes. And then as a final embellishment, I couldn't resist adding some Studio Caudia. I have some gold foil confetti, as well as their ONYX black jewels. I just thought that would really pull out the gold and the black of the main images. So I just kind of scattered a few onto each card front, and then I'm going to adhere them into place with that same multi-medium matte adhesive, just picking it up with my little jewel picker, putting down a dab of the adhesive and pressing them into place. And then that is going to finish off all of these cards. So as always, I will have links below the video to my blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies used. All that info will be in the description box below, as well as on my blog. So if you are interested, you can check that out. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.